Hello, biology students. Hope you guys are doing well. All right, here we go. I thought about a little bit what would be a good way to do our sessions of biology, and I decided PowerPoint and just audio overview or overlay of a voiceover. That's what I'm looking for. Audio voiceover would be a good way to go through things. I also decided to simplify a little bit for you, and you do not have to take notes on this. So I will not give you an open notes quiz. And as mentioned already previously in my email, we will also not have a chapter 15 test. So this is wrapping up chapter 15. What you will have, though, is I emailed 7 questions. At least at this point, I have 7. We'll see if I add any more. But anyway, so I'll email a document that has some questions, and make sure you pull that up before you jump into this video, because your assignment is to answer questions as we go through this video. And then I'll let you know when to send that to me. Yeah, and that should do it. So let's see. I did what I could to keep last week a little bit lighter for you. Didn't have anything assigned that was due last week. You have a few review questions to do that are due at the latest this upcoming Friday, and probably tomorrow morning I'll be getting around to chapter 16, and that will give you an overview of that, as well as I'll look at what the questions are beforehand and make sure that most of them I touch on pretty directly in my teaching, so that you can get your answers from, at least most of your answers from the lecture, rather than having to look at the textbook for it. I know some of you have done those questions already, some of you have turned them in already. But yeah, so that's the plan. So again, make sure you get those questions to answer as we go through this. And here we go. So we're in chapter 15C and then D. Chapter 15C is talking about worms, and then D is other invertebrates. But first, I thought I would start with just a little bit of an overview, a review of what we've looked at of the different kingdoms of living organisms. And this will be just super quick, just hitting some bullet points, some highlights. So first we had kingdoms Eubacteria and Archaebacteria, and that's just in general the bacteria. There's a huge range of how many species, because we think that we've discovered maybe something like 1% of the species that are alive, but we're really not sure. So it's somewhere in the range of 1.5 million is about what has been identified at this point, and a lot of biologists think that possibly it's something like 1 trillion different species of bacteria that exist in the world. And main characteristics of bacteria, they are prokaryotic, which again is where the cell does not have membranes, membrane-bound organelles, so you don't have like a mitochondria, a nice little membrane-bound thing that produces ATP, stuff like that. It's just kind of like you have a nuclear area instead of a nucleus, and all the different processes take place either across the outer membrane of the bacterium or in kind of regions that are not bound by membranes within the cell. So again, they're prokaryotic, they're all single-celled. Um, a lot of them are decomposers, and that's one of the main functions that they serve, is they break down stuff that has died for us. Digest organic compounds would be kind of another way of looking at that. We also talked a little bit about all the different diseases that are caused by bacteria as well. But anyway, so yeah, bacteria. And then we looked at kingdom Protista, and it's estimated there's around 200,000 species, at least, that have been identified so far. They're mostly unicellular, but some are multicellular. Uh, it's like, how can you tell something is a protist? Second bullet point. Well, it's not a bacteria, it's not a plant, it's not an animal, and it's not a fungus. So we'll put it in kingdom Protista. And some of the protists are protozoans. They're kind of animal-like. Usually these feed on stuff and they're free living. And some are kind of plant-like. Those are the algae. Those sometimes do photosynthesis. They're usually attached someplace, though not necessarily. We had like phytoplankton and then zooplankton. So the kind of plant-like algae and the kind of animal-like algae. And then some are fungus-like. Those are like the slime molds. Anyway, examples: amoebas. Oh, I was going to put a picture of an amoeba and a paramecium, but oh well. you can reference your textbook if you want a quick little refresher. And then algae, and then slime mold. So that's kingdom Protista. Algae, we said, is what responsible for about 80% of the conversion of carbon dioxide back into atmospheric oxygen by photosynthesis. That's one of the super important functions that kingdom Protista serves for us. Okay, moving on. Kingdom fungi. Somewhere around 120,000 species. These different from plants in that they're not photosynthetic and they don't have cellulose in a cell wall. Instead of cellulose, they have chitin. Another one of the key characteristics, they have hyphae being some kind of filament, thin strand, and even like the mushroom, the fruiting body that you see above ground, the mushroom, it's made up of just essentially like shaped, mm, intertwined, a bunch of different thin filaments that are intertwined and then end up forming the shape that you see of the mushroom. And these are mostly decomposers, and they do their decomposition through extracellular digestion. So they release digestive enzymes outside of the cell, which then breaks down whatever organic material the fungus is growing in or on, and then the fungus absorbs the nutrition that has been broken down by its digestive enzymes outside of itself. And mushroom or fungi examples we looked at: mushrooms, molds, and yeasts. Moving on, kingdom plantae, somewhere around 400,000 species currently, and these do photosynthesis. They're all autotrophic, so heterotrophic eats food, autotrophic makes his own food. They're all autotrophic. They do photosynthesis for that. And then they also have cellulose. That's one of their characteristics. Different types of plants we looked at. They're non-vascular plants, so they don't have a circulatory system. Example of that we saw was mosses. And then vascular without seeds. So it does have a circulatory system, but does not produce seeds. Instead, produces some kind of a spore. Key example we saw of that were ferns. And then vascular with seeds. So we saw gymnosperms such as conifers, and then angiosperms, aka the flowering plants, phylum Anthophyta. All right, kingdom Plantae. And then now we're in kingdom Animalia. And it's estimated somewhere in the range of 1.2 million to 10 million different species of animals. It's somewhere close to 1.2 million that has been discovered so far. But I think it's something in the range of like, in an average year, maybe like 10,000 new animal species that are discovered. I forget the exact stat there, but something like that. Animals are all heterotrophic. Again, they eat their food. They are, well, two big categories of animals: invertebrates, in other words, ones that do not have a backbone, and then vertebrates, ones that do have a backbone. And currently we're looking at the invertebrates. We looked at phylum Porifera, the sponges, and then we looked at phylum Cnidaria, and one of the things we saw that was characteristic of them is they have the polyp and medusa stages, and they also are characterized by their stinging cells. And examples of cnidarians that we saw were, oh, hold on a second. Oh, well, were hydras, jellyfish, corals, and anemones. And then I made a mistake here. This here, where it says the worms, that should not be under phylum Cnidaria. That should be back out here, and because we're talking about entirely different phyla of worms, and so this is phylum Cnidaria, and so at the same level as that should be worms, and then below worms, okay, we have some different phyla here. One of them, phylum Platyhelminthes, also known as the flatworms, and that's about where we left off. So chapter 15C, the worms. We already looked a little bit at phylum Platyhelminthes, flatworms. We looked at the planaria. We watched some videos. We talked about its regenerative abilities, how you can slice it up and it'll grow back the parts that are missing, all that kind of stuff. A lot of the flatworms are parasites, and we could define parasite as an organism that obtains its nourishment by living in or on another organism. We think we defined that in our notes already, slightly different definition from that, but the overall same meaning. Flukes, I decided to leave off flukes. You can just cross that off from your study guide, but you're probably not paying much attention to your study guide right now because no test on this chapter. Tapeworms is another type of flatworm. We briefly started talking about these. So one of the parts of a tapeworm is the scolex. The scolex is a small bulb-shaped head. It's kind of like a head. It doesn't really serve the same function as a head. It more serves the function of latching or attaching or suctioning slash sucking onto the digestive wall on the inside of your digestive system or an animal's digestive system so that his body can just directly absorb nutrition from the food that is being digested in the host's digestive system. Anyway, so small bulb-shaped head with suckers and or hooks. I have a picture or two of those in just a second. And then a ribbon-like body made of segments called proglottids. So proglottids are the body segments that make up a tapeworm's body. All right, so one picture we have here is the scolex, and some scolexes, a lot of them are like this with both hooks and suckers. Some mainly just have a hook, some mainly just have some suckers. It depends on the species. And the hook and suckers are just for latching onto the inside wall of like your small intestine, your colon, something like that, and the neck. And then these small ones here, immature proglottids, and then they get bigger uh, as they grow. And yeah, you have mature proglottids. So this is like kind of a bird's eye view. That scolex right there, and then that. Oftentimes they're anywhere from like 4 or 6 inches long to sometimes a few feet long is what they can easily get up to. Okay, so that's one view of a tapeworm. And here is an actual, it's called scanning electron microscope. It's used for capturing an image of the surface of very, very, very small things. They basically bombard it with electrons and observe where the electrons and how the electrons, what angle the electrons bounce off, and they use that to form the image. So this would be, yeah, a scanning electron microscope image of some of the hooks of the scolex of a tapeworm. Cute, isn't it? Yeah, would totally love to have one of those things latched on inside of me. Anyway, okay, moving on. Tapeworms, let's see, we talked about scolex, ribbon, and one particular form of tapeworm is the pork tapeworm, and a lot of these have a particular life cycle, so I thought I would give you an idea of what the life cycle would be like. So this is the pork tapeworm life cycle, and what happens is a pig eats proglottids. How does a pig eat proglottids? Well, the pig eats something that has been contaminated with, let's just say, you have improper disposal of human waste. So a person had a bowel movement somewhere, and in their bowel movement were some tapeworm eggs, and those tapeworm eggs got onto some kind of plant material that a pig ate, and a pig ingested some or a proglottid or some eggs, but in this case, an entire proglottid or several proglottids. Inside the proglottid were eggs. The eggs hatch in the pig's intestine. Then from the intestine, the larvae that begin to grow, they burrow through the intestinal lining into the bloodstream, and then from there end up in some muscle tissue. And in the muscle tissue, the larvae form cysts, which are kind of like capsules that can survive harsh conditions. Then what happens is the person eats undercooked infected pig meat. And that's the undercooked is one of the key things there. There's so many different diseases that people can get that are entirely problem solved. You have no risk of getting the disease if you just cook the meat well enough. Plus, we're talking about meat that was contaminated in the first place. I mean, conditions that are the type of conditions that our meat is raised and grown and then packaged and everything like that, we have very little to worry about in the United States. But other parts of the world where conditions are not as good, how do you evolve things like getting a tapeworm? Just make sure the meat is cooked and not on the medium raw side before you eat it. Anyway, so a person eats undercooked infected pig meat, and then the scolex emerges from the cyst and attaches to the human intestinal wall, and then the tapeworm begins to grow inside the person's intestine. As the tapeworm grows, proglottids that have eggs in them randomly drop off and then leave the person's body in their bowel movements, and you repeat the cycle. So, yeah, that's a fun topic. Moving on. Phylum Nematoda. These are the roundworms. And you might think, oh, well, earthworms are round, so are these the kind of worms we're talking about? No, earthworms are something separate. They're known as these segmented worms. These roundworms, they are round, but they're more smooth than what an earthworm is. Oftentimes they're pretty small, usually less than an inch long, though sometimes they can be a little bit longer than that. They can get up to, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 inches long. They're found in a lot of different environments, a lot of different types of soil, underground, places like that. But some are parasitic, and one example is the species or genus species Toxocara canis, and that's the roundworm that gives your dog worms. So if you've ever had a dog or heard of a dog having worms, this is a species that is usually responsible for that. So if we look at this is put out by the CDC, an example of the life cycle of a roundworm. I'm not going to take the time for this because I'm trying to keep this video on the briefer side. If you would like to look at that a little bit more, you are welcome to pause the video, read through what it says a little bit. But yeah, I decided not to spend time on this, but to still provide it in case you want to look. Okay, so moving on. Now we're in phylum Annelida, and these are the segmented worms. Phylum Annelida. So one of the terms on your study guide was septum, and it can be defined as a thin membrane that separates the segments. So all the different specific segments of a segmented worm. Of key example of an earthworm, the septum is kind of like the interior little boundary that separates each of those little compartments. The clitellum is the barrel-shaped swelling of part of the segmented worm's body, and you'll recognize it when you see it. Like, oh yeah, totally, yeah, okay, I know what that's talking about. So if you can't quite picture it based on the definition, just wait till you see the picture in a second. CT. CT are tiny bristles. There are 4 pairs per body segment of an earthworm, and they're used for locomotion. Basically, the CT move almost like teeny tiny little. Well, hold on a second. No, they kind of give a little bit of a grip onto whatever the worm is crawling on, and then the worm can detract and then extend them to grip or not grip. And so it can like grip in one part as it extends his body, and then like grip with the part in the front of his body, and then drag the rear of his body up closer, and then grip with the rear of his body, and then push the front part of his body out further to kind of inch along. Like, especially like if you're talking about an inch worm, it's very clear kind of how it's moving along like that. If you can't picture what I'm saying, look up a video of an inchworm moving and you'll see what I mean. All right, then we had some terms related to the earthworm's digestive system. And one of the reasons for taking a look at something like this is to I think just kind of be reminded of how amazingly complex even something like an earthworm is. I mean, you see it and it's like this small little thing. It doesn't look like there's a whole lot going on, but there's so much going on. And just living organisms are so complex, and there's such variety in how they're designed, and it's yeah. For me, I think that's the biggest reason why we would pause and dig a little bit deeper and look at and talk about some of the specific structures within an organism like an earthworm, a segmented worm, is just to have some of that appreciation. Anyway, so in their digestive system, there's the esophagus, and we could define it as a tube used for transporting food from the mouth to the crop. I have a diagram here in just a second. The crop is the digestive structure for temporarily storing food. You may have heard some of these terms in the context of birds as well. Birds have crops and gizzards that do the same thing. The crop temporarily stores food, and then the gizzard grinds food to break it up into smaller pieces. So basically, an earthworm essentially sucks soil in through its mouth, into its crop, stores some of it, passes some of the soil into the gizzard grinds it up, and then the earthworm is able to digest tiny living organisms that it got when it sucked up some of the soil. Okay, so let's look a little bit at anatomy. It's not super clear, sorry, it's kind of pixelated, but this is a clitellum here. Uh, it I forget the exact body segments, but it is very specific in what body segments the clitellum extends from and then to at the beginning and end of it. And we have the mouth up here and its reproductive structures here, male and female. Earthworms are hermaphroditic. They have both male and female reproductive organs and different pores here, anus at the other end. A glimpse at some of the internal structures here, mouth, the, let's see, what was the next one they had? Esophagus. Esophagus, this tube here, going there. And then we have the crop here that it stores, the gizzard here, and that you can even kind of see, it looks like the muscle is thicker around the gizzard, which that would make sense because if it is doing that grinding, it needs stronger muscular strength. Sorry for the redundancy, but anyway, yeah, to do that. You have some septa, plural for septum, one septum, multiple septa, kind of being shown right there that would separate the different segments. It's intestine, and it goes on from there. Worm reproduction we're going to talk about in just a second. Basically, two worms share or swap sperm with each other, and then the clitellum is signaled to like, oh, begin reproduction, and the clitellum forms like a cocoon, and the worm backs out of the cocoon, so its front side goes backwards as is backing out of the clitellum as the male openings go through the clitellum. Then it releases some sperm. Female openings go through the clitellum, releases some eggs, and the sperm fertilize the eggs, and you're left with this cocoon thing that the worm leaves behind, and several worms that have been fertilized, eggs that have been fertilized grow into worms, and then usually 2 to 3 weeks later, you have several new worms that emerge from the cocoon that was formerly the worm's clitellum. Something else I don't have on the PowerPoint that's coming to mind, you may have experienced the times where like it rains a bunch and all of a sudden they're like earthworms all over the place on the sidewalk, on the pavement, stuff like that. And then the sun comes out and stuff dries out, and then there are like these desiccated, schmancy word for dried out earthworms all over the place. And what's going on there is earthworms don't have lungs. They don't like breathe through their mouth or nose like we do. They don't even have a nose. But what they do is their body can absorb oxygen directly through their skin. But in order to do that, their skin has to be moist, because what happens is the oxygen dissolves into the moisture on their skin, and then their skin is able to absorb the dissolved oxygen is how that works. And so what happens is when it rains, the earthworms are like, oh no, it's too wet. There's too much water here. My skin isn't moist. My skin is completely wet, and oxygen is not able to, when it dissolves, it's not like at a high enough concentration because there's so much water here. And so earthworms come up to the surface to try to avoid drowning, essentially, because they're not able to breathe well enough. They're not able to absorb enough oxygen. And then sometimes the conditions dry out too quickly and they don't have that moisture on their skin. And so then they suffocate because of lack of oxygen in their body. And it's kind of a fine balance that they have to maintain. And it's got to be a bummer sometimes when it's like raining and then the sun is coming out. And yeah, anyway, the life of an earthworm. Hashtag not really. Hashtag earthworm problems. That'll work. All right, closed circulatory system. A closed circulatory system is a circulatory system in which the blood flows through vessels instead of pooling in open cavities. So we also have a closed circulatory system. Earthworms have a closed circulatory system. Oh, the majority of animals that you would think of have closed circulatory systems. But we'll see in chapter 16 that what's the word I'm looking for? That insects, among other things, have open circulatory systems. They don't have blood vessels. They just have kind of open cavities inside of their body, and the blood flows through the cavity, and it kind of bathes the different organs in blood, and the different organs absorb the oxygen that they need directly from that. And we'll see how that relates to a lot of different insects. If they get flipped upside down, why that poses a problem for them. Moving on, aortic arches. These are blood vessels with thick muscles that pump the worm's blood and help regulate blood pressure. They kind of serve the function as the heart in us, but they're just kind of like specialized blood vessels that are doing the gist of what a heart does for us. And then there's the term ganglia, a mass of nervous tissue. It functions as the worm's brain. They don't have a full-fledged brain, but rather they have, this massive nervous tissue that is kind of like a rudimentary brain. Still pretty complex though. And then the reproduction part, I talked through that already on the last slide, so I'm going to move on. All right, that's the rest of chapter 15C. Next, chapter 15D, other invertebrates. So we start out with phylum Mollusca, also known as the mollusks. And the terms on this page are like the key characteristics that characterize the vast majority of mollusks. Every once in a while, you might have something like, oh, there's this one mollusk that doesn't have a radula, but other than that, these are all common to mollusks. So first of all, there's a mantle, and we can say that a mantle is a sheath of tissue that encloses the vital organs of the mollusk. Also, the mantle secretes the organism's shell, and it forms its respiratory apparatus. So main thing, in the mantle, you have the primary vital organs, and then secretes the shell. All right, shell, I defined it there for you when I was thinking, oh, maybe they'll be taking notes, and there'll be students who are like, wait, how should I define the shell? And we could find it as a tough, multi-layered structure secreted by the mantle as a means of protection or body support. But then the visceral hump, the part of the mollusk's body that contains its head and digestive and excretory organs. Or sorry, that contains its heart, not head. So main thing we have in the visceral hump, heart, digestion, and excretion. Excretion, basically where it poops. Where it gets rid of the waste that was created by the process of digestion. And then foot, a fleshy muscular organ used for locomotion. And we'll see that the foot ends up being the key way that several of these organisms get classified as like, what's the primary function that the foot is serving? The primary function that the locomotion, the muscular locomotion part of the organism is serving. And then radula, a small organ covered with many tiny teeth that scrapes up food and draws it into the mollusk's mouth. So like a snail basically scrapes where it's crawling with its radula, and the radula is kind of like teeth, but it's technically outside the mouth, and it's kind of like teeth that scrape stuff into the mouth rather than teeth being inside the mouth. That's the gist of what's going on. And then looking at some of the classes that we have here, this class Bivalvia, the two-shelled mollusks. So these are clams, oysters, mussels, scallops. And valve is what each half of the clam shell is called. So class Bivalvia, the two-shelled mollusks. That's basically what we have going on. And what happens is they have siphons. It has an incurrent siphon that brings water into the bivalve. So if we say like a clam, the incurrent siphon sucks water into the clam, where the clam then filters food out of the water. Clams, oysters, etc. Mollusks are filter feeders. They filter the food out of the water. So it filters food out of the water, and then the water is expelled through the excurrent siphon. And then this class also breathes, typically through gills, maybe exclusively through gills, I don't remember for sure. And gills, thin-walled structures that filter oxygen molecules out of the water so the bivalves can breathe. All right, so what we have for a lot of the slides that are left are just different videos to give us a glimpse at what's going on with some of these different structures. So here we have a mollusk, and this one we're going to see it's going to use its foot, again, foot like a muscular structure that it uses for locomotion. It's going to use its foot in a way that you don't often see a mollusk use its foot. So here we go.
Look.
Cool. That was so cool.
Did you get that?
Yep.
Wow.
Okay, put it back in the water.
So yeah, that's one way that mollusks can get around. They can use their foot almost like sticking out like a big tongue and like push off in order to kind of flip itself a few times. That's one thing that it could do.
Look.
That appears to be restarting. There we go. But then another thing that it can do with its foot is it can turn itself so that it extends its foot down into the sand, and then it can like enlarge the end of it to kind of make it like an anchor, so it's like firmly fixed in place, and then it can contract it to work on burrowing the shells down under the water. So that's kind of what's going on here.
大的很酷。
哇，你看，动了动了。
它，快点，快点，快点，耶，成功了！
I have no idea what URL that is. I did look at it to be like, okay, if there's going to be some random video that has some random URL on it, I better take a look at this. And it doesn't go anywhere. It says like, what? There's no website there. And that's all the web browser does. Anyway, so don't bother.
大的很。
All right, so that is Bivalvia, the two-shelled. Now we're on to other ones that are one-shelled, and the one-shelled ones are mainly characterized based on what their foot does. So we have phylum Gastropoda, gastro, stomach, poda, foot. This is the stomach foot mollusks, the stomach-footed mollusks. And what we have here are snails, slugs, and nudibranchs. And snail anatomy, this is something that, depending on the biology course, you might have to learn, but I decided just to give you a quick glimpse at it, again, just to appreciate the complexity that we have going on. So, because there's so much more going on here than what you would think. I mean, like inside of a snail slug, you have a heart back here. You have a kidney. You have the stomach. You have a liver. You have a lung. And it's kind of awkward, but so the snail eats, and then it goes into, what do we have here? Salivary gland. All right, so the green stuff is the digestive, and then it comes back here into the stomach, and then over around here is the anus, and basically snails kind of poop onto the back of their neck is like the gist of what goes on. So yeah, that's the thing. Let's see. So the foot is this here, but then extends up into the mantle a bit. And so the stomach here is really in what's considered part of the foot. And so you have these stomach-footed mollusks. That's that. Let's see. Cerebral ganglia. They do have some eyes there at the end of their tentacles. And, oh yeah, the bottom of the foot, snails secrete a slime, basically, that they slide across on when they move. And it protects them a lot from what they're crawling on. So you could actually like have a snail crawl along the edge of a razor sharp knife blade, and it wouldn't get hurt at all because its slime coating that it's going along would protect it. Oh, here we have the dart sac. We talked about those a little bit in class with how snails reproduce. There was something else. Oh yeah, given how slow snails crawl, I've often wondered, they must just be kind of like searching for, food as they go along. But it cracks me up how usually they like wind or zigzag where they're going. It's like you'd think if you move so slowly, you wouldn't move in a zigzag. You'd go straight from point A to point B to cut down on the amount of time it takes to get there. But again, they're not really going from point A to point B per se. They're more just meandering as they look for stuff to eat. Okay. So this one is about nudibranchs, because I use that term nudibranchs. You were probably like, what is a nudibranch? Nudibranch is a type of aquatic snail. So here's a little video about them.
I'll bet you're thinking, look at these fascinating, beautiful, exotic creatures. Boy, could I impress my friends by plopping one of these on a sushi roll and serving it for dinner. Stop! Don't! Go back! These are nudibranchs, marine snails with no shells, and many of them defend themselves by releasing chemicals that make them inedible. These particular nudibranchs are found in the waters off the coast of Indonesia. But nudibranchs are very adaptable. You'll find them from Antarctica to the tropics. Their striking colors, what make them so attractive to underwater photographers, are what warn predators to back off. Enjoy the colors. Just don't think of putting a nudibranch in your seafood salad.
All right, moving on.
I'll bet you're thinking.
Another type of aquatic snail is something called the cone snail. Here we go, a little bit about the cone snail.
Cone snails prey on worms, other mollusks, and fish. And it's the species that hunt fish that are most deadly to humans. As we are also vertebrates, like fish, these toxins unfortunately target our physiology. The mollusks can smell their quarry from a considerable distance. Their mantle is drawn out and forms a siphon through which water enters, providing respiration, but also alerting them to the presence of their prey. And at night, most fish are asleep. Closing in on a goby, the slow-moving snail readies its deadly harpoon. In seconds, the fish is immobilized, and the mollusk wastes no time in ingesting the huge meal. The goby will satisfy the snail's hunger for several days.
Dude, how's that for a way to eat, huh? All right. Next, so we're still in Phyla Mollusca, the mollusks, and so last one was class Gastropoda, stomach-footed. This is class Cephalopoda, cephalic, you might remember, of or pertaining to the head, poda, foot. So these are the head-footed mollusks. In other words, it's their head. Essentially, yeah, it's their head that is what they're using for locomotion. And what we have here are squid, octopi, and cuttlefish. So that's a squid, octopus, and a cuttlefish. Cuttlefish, you can see, is kind of similar to a squid, but a little bit different in like where what its tentacles are like relative to its head, but then or its eyes, but then especially this part, its body part, and like what its fin is like. A squid has these two fins at the end there. Cuttlefish has like one big fin that goes all the way around. All right. Let's see. Oh yeah. So a little bit of let me go back one. Octopi, 8 legs. Squid have 8 tentacles. Squid have 8 tentacles, 8 like regular sized tentacles, and then 2 long ones. So they technically have 10 total tentacles. Octopus. So you might be like, well, where's the shell with these? I don't see a shell. I thought that mollusks typically have shells. And what happens with these is the shell is kind of there, but in a different form. Squid have kind of like a slight internal skeletal kind of a structure going on. With octopi, it's essentially their beak that is part of their mouth that is like what they use to eat with. Yeah, so that's kind of the semblance of a shell that is going on with these organisms. Cuttlefish, I'm not quite sure. All right, video about squid. Here we go.
Oh man, that's just awesome! Mussels inside of the wing. So is the squid just one big pile of muscle? Pretty much. This animal is amazingly strong.
Scott tells me that before we ascend, he's going to try to slip the squid cam onto this creature so we could get a candid look at its behavior.
This thing is problem-solving intelligence. It's actually waiting for that moment to try to come back and bite me or to flee. Oh,
These squid use a form of jet propulsion, sucking in water like a siphon and then shooting it back out. They're capable of swimming up to 15 miles an hour.
come on there, sweetheart. This ink that he's been putting out is actually the smoke screen called billowing ink. Okay? Here, no. What's the matter, Brandon? Brandon, what happened? Topside alert! Topside alert! Descending diver! Brandon!
Animal Planet. All right, that's a little one about squid. I remember there's another one that I've seen before, and it's about squid and killer whales, I think, or humpback whales. That these whales that dive way deep underwater kept being sighted with like these long lacerations in their sides and everything like that. And the sailors and marine biologists finally realized that, oh, what's going on, we're pretty sure, is squid are attacking these whales. And usually these whales are predators and pretty vicious. These whales and squid must be getting into it, and the squid are oftentimes winning. So there was that, and then there's some pretty giant squid that have been found sometimes. I forget the exact lengths, but I want to say like 20, 30 feet long, something like that is what some of them are. All right, so here's one of an octopus, and one of the things that the octopi, octopodes, technically with the Greek, or octopuses, as we talked in class, is technically the preferred English plural, but octopi is just kind of what I'm used to saying. Yeah, anyway, octopi are super good, among other things, at being able to escape. Really, the limitation is as long as their beak can fit through an opening, they can get their entire body through. So here's an example of that.
He can go through anything that his beak will fit through. And you watch, he's gonna go right through there. Watch him. Watch him when he hits the water. He'll turn bone white. He's so angry right now.
Are we letting him go?
No, yeah, he's going, man. He's going for it.
Just go by the goal. Wrong way, man.
I mean, if he wants to go, he's gonna feel the water, and then he's gonna go towards the water. See, there he goes.
He got it.
It's gonna be cool. You see that slot?
No way, he can't get to you.
You are wrong, my friend.
You're kidding me.
No.
It's like trying to get my wife in her wedding dress. It ain't gonna happen.
Hey!
Oh man.
That was hard.
Look at him.
I'm gonna tell her.
Don't tell her.
He's going for it.
No way.
I'm telling you right now. And watch, he'll change color too.
He's kind of turning white on the one side there.
When he'll relax.
Look, he can come around you there. Look at that. Nope, sorry.
It's great. It's great. I should borrow one of your legs, buddy, but I'm not gonna.
Stop.
My dad is never gonna forgive me.
He's stuck.
He is not. He is just working his way through. I'm dead serious.
Oh, look at that. Look at it. It's popping. Oh, look at that. He's popping through.
Yeah.
That's nasty. It's like.
Wait, do you want to see it, Allie? Allie. Oh, never mind. He is kind of squeezing through. Oh my gosh. Look at that.
He's going. He's going. There's his nose. He's just all the way through it now.
Except for, just the top.
Just his nose, yeah.
Okay, whack off the leg.
Now watch.
What will he do?
Well, he's realizing he's in the water. There he goes.
Wow. Wow.
Sorry about the angle and movement of that one, but yeah, isn't that crazy? This one is highlighting the camouflage ability that octopi have. Cuttlefish are similar in that um, they have structures in basically their skin cells where they can activate different pigments, or they can create different pigments. I'm drawing a blank right now. In order to create camouflaging for themselves. And they also, because of their soft skin, their soft body, they are able to even adjust the texture, like how smooth versus how bumpy and rugged they are, along with their coloring, to end up blending in really well a lot of times. So here's a look at that. Do you see it? Oh, yeah, it's insane. What's also crazy is the way that they're able to camouflage with not something that they're looking at, but that something that is beneath them. Cuttlefish are the same way, and I'm not sure if biologists completely understand what's going on with how they're able to camouflage so well with something that they're not looking at the time. Um, but yeah, all right, another one. Question is, if you were the cameraman there, how much would you have been freaking out, or how much would you have been like, this is so awesome? And another one.
Here's a giant Pacific octopus in an equally giant aquarium tank. Okay, that's all great for mom and dad and the whole family who come to see the octopus, except, well, there are sharks in this tank as well. Sharks that are voracious predators and opportunistic feeders, and that have been known to veer from their usual fishy diets to munch on an occasional octopus. These are spiny dogfish sharks. Did anybody ask the octopus about this? No. What the aquarium folks are thinking is that the octopus can use its ability to camouflage itself as protection. And if that doesn't work, it has the strength to fight off the shark, or at least dash to the nearest hiding hole it can squeeze into. The aquarium folks soon realize what does happen when you put these sharks and octopi in the same tank, and you're about to see it too, if you've got the courage to keep watching, if only through your splayed fingers. The octopus, not in the habit of attacking sharks. The shark, sharp spines jutting up from its dorsal fins that can puncture anything that touches them. The octopus, can its powers of defense save it in such tight quarters? The shark, menacing, on the prowl, just itching to use those rows of teeth to crush its next meal. I've got a feeling this real-life version of Jaws isn't going to be pretty. And so the shark, shark, boy, am I glad I didn't have a bet down on this matchup. That's right, this is what happened. The giant Pacific octopus, as seen here in this amazing so close you feel like you might get squashed footage, was making short work of the shark in the tank. Dogfish carcasses kept showing up at the bottom of the tank. What you're seeing, this footage, was taken to see what was doing in these supposedly invincible predators. The aquarium staff learned something new about the octopi. There was a danger in the tank, all right, but it was all to the sharks. That's one way to defend yourself from a predator. Eliminate them.
All right. So the setup that I have for this, just the way that the logistics worked out with my setup, I watch the videos, but I'm not able to hear the audio. Most of them, I remember the gist of what the audio says, but not super specifically. And so when they end, sometimes I'm like, okay, I don't exactly know what to say right now because I don't have as much of something to say that is directly based on like what was just being said with how the video wrapped up because I don't remember exactly what the dialogue of the video was at the end. So anyway, if it has seemed kind of weird or random or redundant with what I say when the videos end, that's what's going on.
Here's
Okay, next. So that was phylum Cephalopoda previously, the head-footed, and now we have phylum Echinodermata, also known as the spiny-skinned animals. Echine or echino, that relates to spiny, though it actually it is also the Greek word for hedgehog. So depending on how you're viewing it, you could say this is the hedgehog-skinned animals, or the animals that have skin like a hedgehog. And then dermata, like dermis, skin. And what we have here are things like starfish, that's here on the left, sand dollars, that would be one type of sand dollar there, and then sea cucumbers. And we watched a video already of sea cucumber expelling some of its intestines. And so I double checked a little bit because there are questions about like how does it suck them back in, kind of a thing. And usually it's basically sacrificing parts of its body for the sake of survival. Is what usually is what's going on with sea cucumbers, where they identify a threat and they say, "All right, there's a good chance that this animal is going to eat me if I don't do something," and they can like stick out or expel parts of their intestines with the goal of the animal eating those intestine parts and leaving the rest of the sea cucumber alone. And they can move very slowly. That's a different topic. Sand dollars. But what we do here is we focus just a little bit on starfish. So starfish are class Asteroidea. You might recognize asteroid, basically of or relating to a star. So starfish. And a couple of terms that your study guide had here. There's tube feet, and these are hundreds of suction cup-like structures on the underside of the rays, and they are controlled by a water vascular system. So they are kind of like suction cups, but the way that they suction is the starfish can control the water pressure of the vessels that lead to each of those different tube feet. So they can individually control how much pressure each tube foot is exerting in order to grab onto or latch onto something. And then raise the arms of the starfish. So starfish, one of the things that they'll commonly eat are clams. And basically what they do is a starfish wraps its rays around a closed clam, and then it uses its tube feet to suction onto the shell of the clam, and it exerts an outward pressure or an outward force with its rays to work on prying the clam open. And usually the clam is able to hold its shells closed, but only for a while. And basically the starfish has more endurance for pulling the clam open than the clam has endurance for keeping shut. And eventually the starfish pries the clam open just enough so that its mouth is like lined up with where the opening between the two shells opens up, and the starfish is able to expel its stomach out of its mouth. It basically like vomits its stomach inside out of its mouth, so that its stomach goes into the inside of the clam, where the stomach juices, the gastric juices, the digestive acids that were inside of his stomach are now outside of his stomach because the stomach got turned inside out, inside of the clam, and those juices digest the clam, and the digested clam flesh, as is being digested, it ends up dissolving, or what's the word I'm looking for? Being absorbed by the stomach of the starfish, and once it feels like it has absorbed enough of the nutrition from the clam, then it lets it go and it moves on its way. So yeah, and that is it. All right, so that was chapter 15C, 15D. I did what I could to keep it brief for you, to also minimize the amount of effort that you would have to put. But anyway, hopefully that glimpse at worms and then other invertebrates was interesting. And we will move on to stuff like insects and spiders and other kinds of, butterflies. For those of you like, insects and spiders, like, okay, well, butterflies will also be in the mix with some of what we get into with chapter 16. So again, hope you're doing well, and I will talk to you next time. All right.